Welcome to World Gone Weird, discussing what the heck is going on in the world today. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot of weird to unpack, you guys. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm living in some kind of poorly written satire.
Yeah, it feels a bit like that, doesn't it? Like you think you've seen the craziest thing possible, and then, bam, something even more bizarre pops up. But I think it's really important to try and understand these trends and why these things are happening, even if it is a little mind bending.
Understand? Or just try to make sense of the madness? I mean, clean out Gaza? What kind of language is that? It sounds like something out of a bad action movie, and then move all the Palestinians? Where are they even going to go?
Well, that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? This kind of rhetoric, this idea of cleaning out a place, it completely ignores the reality of the situation, the complex history, and the human cost. It also plays directly into this growing trend of using social media as a platform for these extreme views that gain traction. We are talking about millions of people, not just some area to clean. There isn't a logical solution when the problem is framed this way.
Yeah, well, clean out is certainly a colorful way to describe ethnic cleansing. I mean, you'd think he'd have at least run it by his PR team first, right? Like, hey guys, is clean out too on the nose? Maybe we could go with strategic displacement or optimal reallocation of resources. Something with a little more panache.
It's just so dehumanizing. I mean, these are people's lives we're talking about here, and the idea of just like moving an entire population completely ignores the trauma and the suffering involved. You know, the displacement, the loss of culture, the everything.
But, look, I'm not defending the guy, but is it really that different than what they've been doing all along? I mean, this whole conflict has been about moving people and grabbing land for decades. What's the difference if he says it out loud versus, just doing it slowly?
That's a fair point, Jimmy, and it highlights a crucial problem. The slow, incremental displacement has been happening, but that doesn't make this sudden, sweeping declaration of cleaning out any better. It normalizes an extreme position, and it gives cover for things that are otherwise morally repugnant. What's concerning is that this language, this rhetoric, gains a sort of validation when it's amplified in the echo chambers of social media. It starts to be perceived as the norm.
Oh, you're so right. It's like some kind of warped game of telephone where a ridiculous idea gets bounced around, reshared, amplified, and before you know it, some people are seriously considering turning 1.5 million people into human shuffleboard tiles. And the worst part is, it's all happening in this echo chamber where critical thinking goes to die.
Exactly. And it's not just about this specific situation. It's about how these kinds of extreme ideas can quickly spread and become normalized. You see it in a lot of different contexts. It's the algorithms that are designed to keep us engaged, that are actually pushing these more sensational, more polarizing views. See, that's the thing that bothers me. We're all getting played by these algorithms, and what we see is not the whole story, just the parts that are designed to get our clicks and our attention. So, how much of this is real outrage and how much of this is just people getting manipulated?
That's it, Jimmy. The algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, not to promote truth, understanding, or even rational discussion. If sensationalism gets more clicks, then sensationalism is what you get. And that's where algorithmic bias comes into play. The things that you interact with, that you click on, that you linger over influence what is shown next. It creates these echo chambers where people are only exposed to views that reinforce their existing beliefs. It's a self-reinforcing feedback loop. And when you only hear one side of the argument, it's much easier to get sucked into these extreme positions.
It's like the internet is just a giant customized bingo hall, and we're all just shouting out numbers hoping to get a prize. But instead, we just get more bingo cards that are basically identical. And the prize is what? More arguments with people we already disagree with. Yay.
And it's not just the algorithm, it's the way these ideas are presented too. It's the inflammatory language, the constant push for engagement, the lack of nuance that all fuels the fire. It's the pursuit of online notoriety that drives a lot of this. People want to go viral, they want attention, and if outrage gets clicks, well, that's what they'll give you. The goal becomes to be seen, not necessarily to be right.
But what about personal responsibility? Are we really just helpless victims of algorithms? I mean, aren't people making choices to engage with this stuff? Are we not all responsible for our own actions? And how does someone, really believe you can just clean out a place like it's some messy room?
Of course, personal responsibility is important. We're not robots controlled by algorithms. But the problem is that the system itself is designed to manipulate our natural biases and vulnerabilities, to promote outrage, to create division, and to keep us engaged. It's a system built for addictive behavior, not reasoned discourse. It's the same as a casino, the house always wins. And, as a result, rational thought is pushed aside. People begin to see the world through a distorted lens, which makes the idea of cleaning out Gaza something seemingly reasonable or acceptable.
It's like you're trying to have a sensible conversation in the middle of a mosh pit. Good luck with that, right? And then the most extreme person gets the microphone, and the people who are like, wait a minute, this is bananas, get drowned out, or worse, labeled as part of the problem. It's also exhausting.
It is exhausting, and that's part of the problem too. It's that emotional toll, the constant barrage of negativity, the constant arguments, feeling that everything is falling apart. It takes a huge toll on mental health. It leads to isolation, anxiety, depression. And when people are in that state of mind, they're even more vulnerable to these extreme narratives. And that leads to polarization, right? Because you're all fighting and everyone's angry at everyone else. So how do you solve it? I mean, the more we talk about it, the more angry we all get.
That's a key element. The pursuit of online notoriety, fueled by these algorithms, creates a culture of competition and conflict. It's not about trying to find common ground. It's about scoring points and winning the argument. And this creates deep divisions. These echo chambers reinforce the idea that anyone who thinks differently is the enemy. It becomes an us versus them situation, which makes any kind of dialogue or compromise virtually impossible. And the social consequences are disastrous.
And the mental health aspect? Oh, don't even get me started. I'm pretty sure doom scrolling should be added to the DSM-6 at this point. It's like willingly signing up for a daily emotional gut punch. And then the best part is the algorithm happily keeps serving up more of that garbage. It's a real tragedy.
It's like we're being trained to be constantly outraged. And when you're constantly outraged, it becomes really hard to think clearly or to empathize with other people. It's this cycle of negativity that just keeps feeding itself. And the idea of, actually talking to somebody who has a different viewpoint becomes almost unthinkable because they're not one of us.
But what about the people on the ground? What about the Israelis and Palestinians who are dealing with this in real life, not just online? Are we too busy fighting here that we forget that people are actually living through this? I mean, Trump's solution is just ludicrous, but how does this benefit anyone? It seems like a knee-jerk reaction that will only cause more chaos.
Absolutely, Jimmy. It's easy to get lost in the social media noise, but we need to keep in mind the real-world implications. Trump's suggestion is not just impractical and inhumane. It's a reflection of this larger trend of simplifying complex issues and using divisive language to gain support. It treats people as disposable and disregards history. The idea that you can just clean out a population and relocate it with no major consequences is both naive and dangerous. It completely ignores the human factor.
Oh, it's totally a have you considered just moving everyone somewhere else type of solution. I mean, like we haven't seen that work out fabulously throughout history. It's like, hey, let's just ignore all the deeply rooted issues and pretend that people are like Lego bricks that can be moved around at will. Seriously, this whole thing is it's a spectacular dumpster fire.
And it's that quick, easy solution that's so tempting, right? Because the alternative is much harder and requires actually thinking, understanding history, having empathy. And when everything's moving so fast, when the algorithm is pushing you to the next outrage, it's easy to fall for that quick fix mentality. But this kind of solution, it just perpetuates a cycle of violence and suffering.
And it's not just with Gaza and Palestinians. Look at what's happening in Lebanon, with Israel failing to withdraw. It's like everyone is saying one thing and doing another. How can we believe anyone? Why is there all this conflict when everyone just wants to be safe and live in peace? I think this whole idea of trust has broken down even at the international level.
That's the crux of the problem, the erosion of trust. The ceasefire violations, the lack of transparency, the constant shifting narratives, it all breeds mistrust. And when people don't trust their institutions, their governments, or even the media, they become even more susceptible to conspiracy theories and misinformation. It makes them more willing to believe extreme claims and less likely to engage with rational debate. And the shifting stance of the CIA on COVID-19, that doesn't help either. The agencies responsible for truth are changing their stories.
Yeah, like with the CIA suddenly switching sides on the lab leak theory. Now that's some comedic timing. 5 years and they finally decide an accident is funnier than a conspiracy. But seriously, it's so hard to know what's real anymore. It's like we're all living in a permanent state of collective confusion.
Exactly. And it's that distrust that makes it so hard to find solutions. Because you can't build anything on a foundation of mistrust. And it's also so easy to fall into the trap of us versus them. To think that because they did something wrong, then we are justified in responding with more wrong. That leads to this awful never-ending spiral of conflict.
And then the algorithms just amplify it all, showing you more of what confirms what you already think. It's like we're living in our own personal realities and no one is seeing the same world. How are we supposed to cooperate if we can't even agree on basic facts?
That's a very astute observation, and the algorithms are a key part of that problem. They create these filter bubbles where people are not exposed to diverse perspectives, which further polarizes opinions. And when the main goal of communication becomes to own the other side, any hope of finding a solution is basically gone. The emphasis becomes winning, not understanding, and so we end up here in this mess.
We're basically in a never-ending online cage match where everyone's yelling at each other through a megaphone. And the only winners are the algorithms, the corporations, and the people who benefit from all this chaos. It's a real win-win for them, I guess.
It just feels so hopeless sometimes, like we're trapped in this cycle of negativity and division, and you just keep hoping to find something that might bring hope. We have to find a way to break this cycle of outrage, to find some common ground, to actually talk to each other as human beings and address these problems in real life, not just online.
But what if people don't want to find common ground? What if they just want to be angry and fight? I mean, some people seem to thrive on conflict, and that's why it's so hard to find solutions. Maybe that's just human nature.
That's certainly a grim possibility, and maybe there's a small element of truth in that claim. But I believe that a significant part of that behavior is being driven by the system itself. The algorithms, the echo chambers, the pursuit of online notoriety, it all incentivizes conflict and division. If we create a system that rewards outrage, that promotes dehumanization, that erodes trust, then of course, we're going to see more conflict. It's not necessarily human nature. It's a product of the environment we create. We have to address these systemic issues.
So, what you're saying is the internet is just a big, elaborate Skinner box, and we're all just a bunch of pigeons pecking at the buttons to get our little dopamine hit of outrage and validation, and then the house always wins with that sweet, sweet engagement and advertising revenue. It's also perfectly engineered to bring out the worst in us.
Yeah, it really feels that way sometimes. And that's why we need to be more aware of the forces that are shaping our opinions and actions. We have to be more critical of the information we consume. We need to question the narratives that are being pushed at us, and we need to actively seek out different perspectives. It's really the only way to avoid just getting dragged along in this sea of anger and division.
So what's the alternative? Are we just supposed to give up and let the world burn? I mean, what's the point of even trying if the system is rigged?
We can't give up. That's the one thing we shouldn't do. The first step is awareness, understanding how we're being manipulated and how we're contributing to the problem ourselves. The next step is to actively challenge these systems, to promote critical thinking, to emphasize empathy and understanding, and to engage with the world in real life, not just online. We have to demand transparency from our leaders, from our institutions, and from these technology companies. We also need to create more resilient communities that are less reliant on these systems that incentivize this behavior. It's a tall order, but it's absolutely essential.
So basically, we need to go on a digital detox, start talking to our neighbors, and maybe learn to knit or something. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm ready to trade my outrage for yarn, but I guess it's better than, ending up as a character in a real-life dystopia.
It's not about just shutting down and isolating ourselves. It's about using technology mindfully, about focusing on building strong real-life connections. It's about seeking out positive solutions, and about finding ways to bridge the divides that are tearing us apart. It's also about trying to understand the root causes of these problems, not just treating the symptoms. And that means tackling the inequality, the injustice, the distrust that fuels so much of this anger and division.
It's a lot of work, It's easier to just yell at the screen, but I guess that's the problem, right? That we've all gotten too comfortable being angry and passive instead of actually trying to make a difference. I am skeptical that we can actually do it, but you're probably right. We have to try.
Exactly, Jimmy. And it is a lot of work. It will not be easy, but it's absolutely necessary. We can't let the systems or our own anger drive us to chaos. It requires a conscious effort, a commitment to empathy, understanding, and critical thinking. It's about building bridges, not walls. It's about demanding transparency, holding power to account, and creating a more just and equitable world. It's the responsibility of all of us, not just some of us. And, most of all, we need to be willing to question the narratives and the systems that profit from the chaos.
Well, on that slightly less doom and gloom note, I guess we should wrap it up. Maybe we can all go out and try to have an actual conversation with someone who disagrees with us instead of just firing off angry tweets. Or, maybe just take a nap. That sounds pretty good too. Thanks for joining us on World Gone Weird. See you next time, if the world hasn't completely fallen apart by then.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Let's try to find the good in the world and not get bogged down in all of this negativity. It's really important to remember that the majority of people just want peace, safety, and a better life. So let's work towards that. Until next time.